In the city that never sleeps, where millions rush by without glancing sideways, a quiet question broke through the hum of silverware and designer gowns. "Can I eat what you didn't finish?" It was whispered by a 10-year-old girl, her lips cracked from the cold, her eyes heavy with the weight of being unseen. In that luxurious restaurant on the Upper East Side, where compassion had long been taken off the menu, she dared to break the silence. She wasn't asking for spare change. She was asking for dignity. Across the table, a powerful woman, praised, wealthy, untouchable, stared at the child as if seeing something impossible, a reflection of what she herself had lost long ago. This isn't just a story about adoption. It's a story about the exact moment when two broken souls recognize each other. It's about the power of one choice, to hear the unheard, to welcome the uninvited, to turn a simple gesture into a daily miracle. You're about to meet Charlotte Harper, a millionaire businesswoman in the world of fashion, known for her cold precision and flawless image. Until the night a filthy, hungry, and lonely child reached out, not for money, but for something far rarer, a chance. And you'll meet Abby, a little girl shaped by abandonment, by pain, by survival, who believed she wasn't worthy of love, until she discovered that loving can be more terrifying than being alone. Together, you'll follow the rebirth of two lives that were never meant to cross paths. But when they did, everything changed. This is a story of pain, escape, illness, promises, and forgiveness. But above all, it's a story of rebirth, of how one innocent question disarmed a guarded heart, of how a meal became shelter, of how an act of compassion became a family that would go on to inspire the world. Today, that little girl no longer asks for leftovers. She feeds others. Today, that woman no longer runs just a brand. She leads a cause. And together, they prove that love doesn't have a permanent address. But when it finds a home, it can change destinies. You're about to hear a realistic and deeply emotional story, the kind that lingers long after the screen fades to black. But be warned, it may change how you see the world. It may make you question what it really means to belong, and it may make you wonder, what would you do if someone asked you, "Can I eat what you didn't finish?" The wind howled down the avenues of Manhattan, slipping between the towering buildings like a ghost, cold and relentless. It was the kind of November night that pierced through even the thickest coats, making every breath visible and every step feel intentional. The city lights flickered against the haze of winter, and the Upper East Side glowed in soft amber beneath a curtain of mist. Outside the Grand Oak, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, a line of luxury cars stood in silent precision. Inside, warmth, elegance, and orchestral music created a parallel world, untouched by the chill and chaos just beyond the glass. Charlotte Harper, 32, impeccably dressed in a navy silk gown and an ivory wool coat draped over her chair, sat at a corner table reserved months in advance. Her name carried weight in the fashion world, a visionary, a perfectionist, a woman who had turned minimalism into a movement and Harper Atelier into an empire. The maitre d' had personally ensured her privacy. Now she sat alone with a glass of Bordeaux, reviewing design drafts on her tablet, while a half-eaten risotto grew cold on her plate. She didn't notice the small figure at first, not until the hush at nearby tables made her look up. A child stood at the edge of her table. A girl, maybe 9 or 10. Her hair was tangled beneath a wool cap, her oversized coat patched with duct tape. Her sneakers, soaked and torn, left wet prints on the hardwood floor. Charlotte blinked, unsure whether the scene was real or some cruel mirage. The girl was trembling, but her gaze held steady, locked on the plate. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, the girl asked, "Can I eat what you don't finish?" Time paused. Around them silence spread like wildfire. A waiter stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Charlotte raised her hand slightly, a silent command, as decisive as any instruction she'd ever given backstage at a show. The girl's lips quivered, but she didn't look away. Her cheeks were raw from the cold, her hands hidden deep in her sleeves. Her presence was an act of both bravery and desperation. A fracture in the evening's carefully Curated perfection. Charlotte studied her face. There was something about her, not disturbing but hauntingly still, as if she had learned long ago how to be invisible. Something deep within Charlotte, something long buried, stirred. A forgotten version of herself. "No," Charlotte said softly. The girl flinched. Charlotte continued, her voice calm but firm. "Not what I don't finish. Sit down, you'll eat with me." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. The maître d' rushed over, face tight with unease. "Miss Harper, if there's a problem, she's with me." Charlotte interrupted, eyes still on the girl. "Bring another chair." The girl hesitated, her shoulders twitching in a defensive reflex, bracing for mockery or rejection, or worse, removal. But it didn't come. Charlotte reached for the empty chair and pulled it close. "Please, sit." Slowly, cautiously, as though crossing sacred ground, the girl obeyed. She slid into the seat, eyes downcast. A waiter approached, visibly uneasy, and placed a fresh napkin and silverware in front of her. Charlotte signaled discreetly for another plate. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Abby," the girl said after a pause. "Abby Monroe." "I'm Charlotte." Abby didn't respond. She stared at the breadbasket in the center of the table like it was treasure. Her hands remained in her lap, clenched tightly. Charlotte nudged the basket toward her. "Go ahead." Abby hesitated for only a second, then took a roll, then another. She tore them apart with trembling fingers and ate quickly, quietly, pausing now and then to glance up, as if expecting someone to scold her. Moments later, a plate of warm pasta arrived. Creamy fettuccine with truffle oil and grilled vegetables. Charlotte thanked the waiter, ignoring the curious, judgmental stares around them. None of that mattered now. Something far more important was unfolding. As Abby ate, Charlotte watched her, not with pity, but with a quiet awe. There was hunger, yes, but also dignity and a strength that had clearly been forged through pain. "Where are your parents?" Charlotte asked softly. Abby froze mid-bite. Then, still looking down, she answered, "Gone." The word hung between them like a snowflake suspended in air. Charlotte didn't press. She just nodded. Her own appetite had vanished, but her heart, confused, aching, felt full for the first time in ages. The rest of the meal passed in silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and soft murmurs of conversation. Abby finished every bite. Charlotte ordered dessert, warm apple tart with vanilla ice cream. Abby's eyes widened, and Charlotte, for the first time that night, smiled. "I used to love this when I was little," she said. "It was the only sweet thing my mother ever made." Abby nodded, slowly taking a bite. Her expression softened. When the check came, Charlotte waved it away and stood, wrapping herself in her coat. She looked at Abby. "Where will you go after this?" Abby hesitated. "Nowhere. Just back." "Back where?" Abby lowered her gaze. "I sleep near the subway." "It's warm there?" Charlotte felt her breath catch. That sudden, painful awareness of the invisible wall between two worlds. "Would you come with me?" she asked. "I have a place nearby. You can take a hot shower, warm up, rest, just for tonight." Abby's eyes flicked around wary. "Why would you help me?" Charlotte didn't have a neat answer, only a feeling, like standing at the edge of something that mattered more than anything she'd ever created. "Because I think we both need this tonight." The girl didn't reply, but slowly she stood, still holding the last piece of bread. She gave a tiny nod. Together they stepped into the cold, leaving behind a room buzzing with whispers, and disappeared into the foggy night. Two strangers, not charity, not chance, but the fragile beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. The bitter wind of Manhattan still blew relentlessly as the taxi pulled up in front of the red brick building in Soho. Charlotte stepped out first, then extended her hand to Abby, who hesitated for a moment before taking it. Her hand was light, cold and clammy, but steady. There was something in that grip, a fragile trust, like a thread newly formed between two lives that were never meant to cross. The doorman recognized her immediately. "Good evening, Miss Harper," he said, though his eyes lingered on Abby with a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Charlotte gave a short nod. "She's with me." In the elevator, silence felt heavier. Abby stared at the glowing buttons like they belonged to a world. She never imagined she'd enter. When the doors opened on the 10th floor, a wave of warmth, scented with wood and lavender, greeted them. This was Charlotte's home, modern, minimalist, with massive windows that framed the city like artwork. But for Abby, it felt like another planet. She didn't step inside right away. She hovered at the threshold, as if crossing it meant betraying the world she came from. "You're safe here," Charlotte said, taking off her coat and hanging it neatly. "Come in." With cautious steps, Abby crossed the threshold and stared down at the gleaming wooden floor. The walls, white and smooth, held only a few pieces of art, delicate silhouettes in muted tones. Everything was too beautiful, too quiet, too clean. Charlotte walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. "Would you like something? Milk? Tea?" Abby shook her head. She stood still in the middle of the room, her eyes scanning the space as if afraid of triggering some invisible alarm. "There's a bathroom just there," Charlotte said gently. "You can take a hot shower if you'd like. There are clean towels and some clothes that might fit." She paused, unsure how to say it without sounding condescending. "It's totally up to you. Whatever makes you comfortable." Abby gave a small nod, and Charlotte led her to one of the guest rooms, the smallest, though still large by any child's standard. She pointed out where everything was, and then stepped back, leaving the door slightly ajar. Charlotte stood in the hallway for a while, listening. The girl's soft footsteps, the timid creak of the faucet, the gentle splash of water hitting the shower tiles. Something inside Charlotte clenched tightly. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even compassion. It was something else. A broken mirror inside her, slowly starting to realign. Later, when Abby emerged from the bathroom, her damp hair hanging loosely and wearing one of Charlotte's oversized sweatshirts, her expression had softened. The tension was still there, but now there was something else, a flicker of relief, of sheer exhaustion. Charlotte offered her a cup of tea with honey. "Thank you," Abby whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the couch. It was the first thing she'd said since the restaurant. Charlotte sat down at the other end of the couch. The distance between them felt symbolic. Two people from opposite worlds, trying to meet in the space between. "Abby," Charlotte began, "I don't usually do this, actually. I've never done anything like this. I'm not even sure what made me stop last night. I just couldn't walk away like it meant nothing." Abby didn't reply, but her hands gripped the cup a little tighter.
"You were so calm, so strong."
Even in that moment, Charlotte's eyes dropped to her lap. "You reminded me of myself when I was a kid." Abby looked up, surprised. "You?" Charlotte nodded. "I didn't always live in these tall buildings. I grew up in a small house in New Jersey. My mom was a seamstress. My dad didn't stay long. I knew what it was like to go to bed cold. I knew what it felt like to want to disappear just so I wouldn't be a burden." The silence between them shifted. It was no longer uncomfortable. It was understanding. "You can sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure things out." "Okay?" Abby nodded. And then, without thinking, she leaned back into the side of the couch, her small body sinking into its warmth. Within minutes, she had drifted off, still holding the now empty cup in her hands. Charlotte watched her for a long time. Her face finally relaxed, looked even more fragile, but there was a painful beauty in that peace, as if this child had aged far too early, and only sleep could return to her some fragment of childhood, if just for a night. The next morning, Charlotte woke before sunrise. Her body was used to rigid schedules, meetings, deadlines. But this morning wasn't about business. It was about a choice, one that wasn't written in any contract. She found Abby still curled up on the couch, knees tucked in, as if trying to make herself small enough not to be noticed. Charlotte quietly moved to the kitchen and made pancakes, poured fresh orange juice and sliced fruit onto a small plate. Nothing extravagant, just something that said, "You deserve care." When Abby opened her eyes and saw the table, her eyes widened. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Charlotte pulled out a chair. "Come sit here with me." Abby hesitated, then slowly obeyed. She ate slowly, cautiously, not wanting to appear ungrateful, but with the quiet urgency of someone who didn't know when their next meal might come. "Abby," Charlotte said softly, "whatever you feel like sharing, whenever you're ready." I'll listen." The girl lowered her gaze. Running away was my only choice. Charlotte didn't answer. She simply placed her hand over Abby's, firm, warm, present. It was the beginning of something neither of them could quite name. But it was real, and for the first time since she reached out to that little girl the night before, Charlotte knew with certainty she wasn't just offering help. She was accepting a silent invitation to change her own life too. The afternoon crept in slowly, with a grey sky hanging heavy over the buildings of Soho, hinting at rain. Inside the quiet loft, soft light filtered through the wide windows, bathing the wooden floor in golden hues. Charlotte was in the kitchen, preparing 2 mugs of hot chocolate, while Abby sat curled up in an armchair under a light blanket. She still looked far too small for the space. Around her, like the world, there was simply too big for her. Charlotte knew she couldn't rush anything, but she also knew there was something in Abby's eyes, a kind of invisible weight, old and worn, carried with the dignity no child should ever have to bear. They had spent the day in near silence, sharing only glances and quiet gestures. It wasn't until night began to fall that Abby finally spoke. "They died in a car crash," she said suddenly, without any prompting from Charlotte. Her voice was soft, almost too fragile to cross the space between them. Charlotte sat down, heart tightening. "Your parents?" Abby nodded, eyes fixed on the warm mug between her hands. "I was 8. We were coming back from my grandmother's house. A truck ran a red light. The ambulance took too long. They said my mom died on the scene. My dad at the hospital." Charlotte didn't say a word. She just listened. Abby's pain didn't need advice, it needed space. "I stayed with neighbors for a while, then was sent to a shelter. I was adopted by a couple when I was 9. She paused. A long, painful silence. "At first it seemed okay. They smiled, called me sweetheart. They had a nice house, a dog. But behind closed doors they were different." Charlotte leaned in slightly. "Different how?" Abby took a while to answer. When she did, her gaze didn't move. "They yelled a lot. Locked me in my room over nothing. Said I didn't deserve to be chosen, that I should be grateful just to be there. And him, the husband, he touched me, not like a dad should." The silence that followed was cruel. Charlotte felt the world freeze. Her throat tightened. Every word Abby spoke felt like shards of glass tearing through the air. But the girl spoke with an eerie calm, like someone who had told this story to herself 1,000 times. On cold nights beneath bridges or in empty subway stations, I told a social worker at school. I thought someone would listen, but they didn't believe me. Said I was just acting out because I had trouble adjusting. Gdeeze. For the first time, Abby looked directly into Charlotte's eyes. The next week I ran away, took my coat and left. I never went back. Charlotte brought a hand to her face, fighting back tears. The pain was raw, real, and yet Abby wasn't asking for pity, only truth. Since then, Abby continued, I sleep wherever I can. Subway stations are good when it rains. Some churches let you in. I try not to steal, I just ask. Sometimes I go 2 days without eating, but I never went back. Not once. Charlotte felt the weight of it all settle in her chest. She couldn't understand how this girl still had the strength to speak, to breathe, to continue, to smile faintly like she had that morning over breakfast. Abby? No one should ever go through something like that. Abby shrugged. It happens more than you think. I'm just one of the unlucky ones. But I survive. I always survive. Charlotte couldn't hold back the tears anymore, and they weren't just for Abby. They were for a world that allowed this to happen. For a system that didn't listen, didn't see, didn't believe. For so many stories like Abby's, lost in files and excuses. She got up and knelt in front of the armchair, placing her hands gently on the girl's knees. You're unbelievably strong, and you'll never have to go through this alone again. I promise. Abby bit her bottom lip, as if trying to hold something in. But the tears finally came, silent, steady, like they had waited too long for permission. Charlotte pulled her into a hug, slowly, giving her time. Abby hesitated for a few seconds, and then, for the first time, let go. She buried her face in Charlotte's shoulder and wept, not like a child throwing a tantrum, but like someone who had held the weight of the world alone for far too long. There in that quiet loft, with the city lights flickering in the distance, two broken souls began to stitch themselves together, one to the other. Later that night, while Abby slept soundly in the guest room, Charlotte sat in front of her computer, staring at the screen, unsure where to begin. She wasn't just a businesswoman. She had reach, resources, influence. She had always taken pride in using sustainable fabrics, in promoting women in fashion. But what about the ones who didn't even have a place to sleep? Charlotte opened a blank document and typed the girl's name at the top. Abby Monroe. Maybe it was just a symbolic gesture. Or maybe it was the beginning of something real, something far bigger than herself. But one thing was certain. After that night, Charlotte would never see the world the same way again. And while she didn't yet know exactly what the future held, she already knew one thing with absolute clarity. She wouldn't let Abby walk away. Sunday morning arrived with the muffled sound of rain, tapping against the windows and the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. The loft was quiet, but something in the atmosphere had changed, as if the home, once defined by its elegant stillness, had awakened to something warmer. Charlotte moved through the kitchen in gentle steps, almost afraid to disturb the delicate enchantment that had formed since the night before. Abby was still sleeping. She was curled up beneath the soft duvet, her face partly hidden between the pillows, even in rest. There was tension in her expression, as if her dreams still carried the weight of memories she longed to forget. Charlotte watched her from the slightly open door for a moment, then returned to preparing breakfast. For the first time in years, she had cancelled her entire Sunday schedule. No brunches with investors, no meetings with the creative team. That day, nothing felt more important than the little girl sleeping in her guest room. By the time Abby woke, the rain had softened into a fine mist, and the dining table was set with cut fruit, toast, scrambled eggs, and hot chocolate. She stopped in the doorway, hesitant, wide-eyed, as if she still couldn't believe it was all meant for her. Charlotte smiled and pulled out a chair. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" Abby nodded slowly. "Yes, a lot." "I'm glad. Come sit. There's a bit of everything. Help yourself." The girl walked over carefully and sat at the edge of the chair, hands in her lap. She looked at the food the way someone might look at something sacred. Charlotte noticed and said nothing. She simply served a small portion and passed her the plate. They ate in silence for several minutes until Abby finally broke it. This feels weird to me." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "What does?" "All of this. The big bed. The way the towel smelled clean. Someone making food just for me. Kindness." Charlotte took a deep breath, feeling that truth land between them like a quiet blade. "You deserve all of this, Abby, and so much more." The girl looked away, unsure how to respond. She was used to deserving little or nothing at all. After breakfast, they spent some time by the window, watching the rain fall gently over Manhattan. Charlotte wrapped a blanket around Abby's shoulders and handed her an old photo album from her childhood. "That's me, 10 years old. Not too different from you, believe it or not." Abby looked at the photo with curiosity. Charlotte's hair had been longer, her smile timid, but the eyes were the same, steady, alert, filled with silent dreams. "You looked happy." "I was in parts. Life was tough, but my mother always tried to bring color to gray days." Abby gave the slightest smile, barely visible but there. Later, Charlotte suggested a short walk to the community library, a few blocks away. Abby hesitated at first but eventually agreed, on the condition that she could wear a hoodie. The world outside still made her shrink inward. Walking side by side along the damp sidewalk felt like crossing an invisible bridge. Charlotte walked slowly, at Abby's pace, with no rush, honoring her rhythm. When they reached the library, the scent of old books and polished wood greeted them like a warm embrace. Abby wandered between the shelves like someone stepping into a secret temple. "Can I borrow this one?" she asked, holding up a book of stories. "Of course, as many as you want." Charlotte filled out the new visitor registration with her own address. When she placed the library card into Abby's small hands, her throat tightened. That simple gesture, the right to a name, A place where she was welcomed carried the weight of an entire life. On the walk home, Abby seemed lighter. She talked about a book she once read at a shelter, about a dog she saw in Central Park, even laughed at a taxi driver who had shouted curse words in another language. Charlotte laughed with her, surprised by this new side of Abby. It felt like watching something delicate bloom, something that had only needed warmth to grow. That evening, Charlotte made lasagna. Abby helped, carefully slicing vegetables with the focus of someone performing a sacred ritual. They laughed when the sauce splattered on Charlotte's shirt, and for the first time, Abby called the place home without even realizing it. "This house is really quiet," she said as she set the table. "It was," Charlotte replied, "until you arrived." After dinner, they settled on the couch, this time with ease. Charlotte showed Abby a sketchbook filled with dress designs and unfinished ideas. Abby stared at each page, eyes wide. "You draw all of this?" "Since I was a kid. My mom taught me my first stitches. The rest came with time." Abby fell silent for a moment. "I like to draw too, but I've never shown anyone. If you ever want to share something, I'd love to see it." The girl thought for a second, then shook her head. "Not yet, but maybe someday." Charlotte nodded. That was more than enough. The fact that Abby had said maybe was already a leap forward. Later that night, with the city shimmering outside the windows, Charlotte went to the guest room to say goodnight. She found Abby sitting on the bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. "Can I ask you something?" Abby said, "Of course. Are you going to send me away tomorrow?" Charlotte's heart ached. "No, Abby, I'm not going to send you away. Not as long as you want to stay." The girl didn't answer right away, but her eyes welled with tears, and she slowly laid her head on the pillow, as if, finally, she could rest for real. Charlotte turned off the light and stood there for a moment, watching in silence. And then she whispered to herself, "Maybe you rescued me too." That night fell with an unusual silence. Outside, New York still pulsed with honking horns, sirens, and flashing lights. But inside the loft, everything felt suspended, as if time itself were breathing more slowly. Abby had gone to bed early. The entire day had been filled with new experiences, the library, cooking, conversations, laughter. But something in her eyes at the end of the night had shifted, a quiet emptiness, like a loose thread just waiting to snap. Charlotte noticed, but chose to respect the silence. She'd spent hours by the fireplace, deep in thought. Something inside her was changing. Something profound. The way that girl looked at her awakened pain in places Charlotte thought had long been healed. And yet it also stirred a kind of care she had never known before. Not charity, but instinct, connection, love, maybe. Still premature, still nameless. Before going to sleep, Charlotte left the guest room door slightly ajar. She wanted Abby to know she wasn't alone, that she could come out if she needed to. That there were no locks, no yelling, just space, just presence. What Charlotte didn't expect, what she could never have predicted, was waking up hours later with a sinking feeling in her chest. A wrong kind of silence, an absence that felt too loud. She jumped out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor, heart racing before she even understood why. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, clothes folded on the chair, and on the pillow, a small note written in shaky handwriting. "You were so good to me. Too good, but people like me don't belong in places like this. Thank you for everything." "Abby!" Charlotte stood frozen. For a moment, her entire body stopped. Time, breath, everything suspended. And then pain, a punch to the chest, a desperate urgency. She rushed to the door, which had only been closed out of habit. The keys were still there. Abby had walked out on foot, alone, back to nothing. Charlotte threw on her shoes without thinking, grabbed her coat and ran out into the damp night. Ignoring the hour, her phone, the doorman's questions. She descended into the streets of Soho like a woman possessed. Each step echoed with a question. Why did she leave? Where could she be? What did I do wrong? The city, once familiar, now felt like a cruel labyrinth under the drizzle. Blurred faces, shadowy corners, subway stations that could be hiding hundreds of invisible Abbeys. Charlotte stopped in front of the Houston Street station. Her heart pounded. She remembered Abby's words about how stations were warm, how no one bothered you there. She descended the cold stairs, the damp air clinging to her skin. She wandered the corridors, scanning every corner, every metal bench, every shape curled under thin blankets. But she wasn't there. Not at 14th Street either. Not at the corner by the restaurant where it all began. Hours passed. Charlotte wandered like someone unwilling to accept the loss. Every street was a new flicker of hope. Every shadow a jolt of fear. And within her a rising ache. The ache of having loved something real, only to feel it slip through her fingers. She sat on a bench in Times Square as dawn began to break. The sky was growing pale, and the first store lights flickered on. Charlotte ran her hands down her rain-streaked, tear-dampened face, feeling smaller than she had in years. Maybe not since losing her mother. Maybe not since she'd vowed to become strong enough to never need anyone again. But now she needed something. A child's smile, a small presence that had filled her space and, without meaning to, had given it meaning. She closed her eyes and tried to recall what she might have forgotten to say in time. You do belong. You matter. You changed me. When she opened her eyes, her phone was vibrating. No calls, no texts, just endless notifications that felt meaningless in the face of what truly mattered. She ignored them all except one thought: keep looking. Charlotte spent the rest of the day walking, asking around, showing a blurry photo she had taken of Abby the night before at dinner. It wasn't clear, but it was all she had. She went to community churches, drop-in centers, bus stops. No one had seen her. That night, exhausted and hollow, she returned home. The loft now felt larger, colder, harsher. She stopped in front of the note Abby had left and read it for the 100th time. People like me don't belong in places like this. Charlotte pressed the paper to her chest, and in the stillness of that early morning, she made a promise to herself. I will find you, and I will prove that you do belong, not to a place, but to someone. Across town, in a dark corner near Grand Central Station, Abby curled beneath an old blanket. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the weight of the decision she had just made. She stared at the concrete ceiling above, listening to the distant rumble of passing trains. She was back to what she knew, the hard pavement, the indifferent glances, the gnawing hunger. But something was different now. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't stop remembering the smell of coffee in the morning, the warmth of the blanket, the laughter in the kitchen, the gentle touch of a hand, and most of all, the way Charlotte had looked at her, not like someone giving charity, but like someone seeing her, like someone welcoming her. Charlotte's words echoed in her mind. You deserve all of this, and so much more. But did she really? Abby hugged her knees tightly, trying to hold back the tears. For the first time, running didn't bring relief. It brought guilt, longing, doubt, and somewhere deep inside her, a seed had been planted. A question, still unanswered. What if I could go back? Night had fallen heavy over New York, like a dark, damp veil covering streets and hearts alike. For Charlotte, time had lost all meaning. The hours blurred together into an endless sequence of hurried steps, unanswered phone calls, empty stares and dismissive shrugs. No one had seen Abby. No shelter had any record of her. No officer had truly paid attention to Charlotte's description, but she refused to give up. Since the night Abby disappeared, Charlotte hadn't stopped moving. She walked through subway stations known for sheltering the homeless. She questioned staff at shelters, hospitals, community posts. She showed Abby's photo to anyone who even remotely resembled her world. Every no felt like another needle to the heart. But stopping wasn't an option. Not while Abby was out there, alone, scared, sick. Because that was Charlotte's greatest fear now, that Abby was sick. The last few nights had been cold and wet. Abby had been coughing, a light, persistent cough, the day before she vanished. Charlotte had noticed, but Abby, as always, downplayed it. And now the risk was real, life-threatening. It was on the third morning that everything changed. Charlotte had decided to go to Grand Central Station one more time. Maybe because her heart pulled her there. Maybe because it was one of the few places Abby had mentioned by name. She descended the steps of the station, ignoring the city's morning rush, then turning into one of the side corridors, dark, Cold, rarely patrolled, she stopped. There, curled up beside a pile of cardboard boxes, was Abby, pale, sweating, shivering. Charlotte ran. "Abby!" The girl didn't respond. She was lying on her side, eyes half closed, lips cracked. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. Her skin was flushed and damp. And the cough, faint but relentless. Charlotte dropped to the cold floor, unbothered by the grime or the stairs. "Oh my God, Abby. Can you hear me? It's me, Charlotte. Can you hear me?" Abby tried to move her eyes, but couldn't. Charlotte grabbed her phone and called 911, her voice trembling. "I found a child. She's unconscious, weak breathing. Possible pneumonia. I need an ambulance. Grand Central Station, East Wing. Please hurry." While she waited, she wrapped her coat around Abby, cradling the small body against hers, trying to give her the warmth the world had denied. "You're going to be okay. I'm here. I'm not leaving, I promise." The ambulance arrived in under 10 minutes, but for Charlotte, they were the longest 10 minutes of her life. St. Mary's Hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Harsh lights stung her eyes. The waiting felt like punishment. Abby had been rushed straight to the pediatric wing. She had a high fever, severe dehydration, and advanced pneumonia. Charlotte didn't leave her side. She sat beside the hospital bed, her hands gently holding Abby's, ignoring her phone, the endless emails, the flood of missed messages from her team. Nothing else mattered anymore. Let the world fall apart. She wasn't going anywhere. She made it just in time, the doctor said hours later, her expression serious. But her condition is critical. She needs rest, antibiotics, fluids, and most of all, a safe environment. It's clear this girl has endured severe trauma. Charlotte nodded slowly. She'll have that. All of it and more. Over the next 2 days, Charlotte barely slept. She stayed by the bed, reading softly, gently stroking Abby's hair, watching each breath, every twitch. And then on the morning of the 3rd day, Abby opened her eyes, weak but alive. Charlotte felt air return to her lungs, as if she were breathing for the first time since Abby disappeared. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, tears welling. "You're back." Abby tried to speak but coughed. Charlotte quickly offered her a sip of water, holding the cup to her lips. "You found me," the girl whispered. "Of course I did. I never stopped looking." Abby's eyes brimmed with tears. I thought you didn't want me anymore." Charlotte gently cupped her face. "Don't you ever say that. Don't ever think that. I searched everywhere for you, and now that I've found you, I won't let you go. Not again." Abby closed her eyes, and a tear slid down her thin cheek. "I'm sorry I ran away. I thought I didn't deserve it." Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed and squeezed her hand. "You do. You deserve love, care, safety, everything the world tried to take from you. And I want to give that to you." Abby took a deep breath. Her eyes closed again. Her body softened, trusting. It was the beginning of something new, not a miracle, but a rebuilding, piece by piece, breath by breath. That night, Charlotte stayed beside the bed, as she had from the very start. But something inside her had shifted too. For the first time, it wasn't just Abby fighting for her life. Charlotte was fighting too, against the distance she'd taught herself to keep, against the walls she'd built to avoid attachment, loss, pain. Abby had broken through those walls with nothing more than sad eyes and one quiet question: "Can I eat what you don't finish?" Now it was Charlotte who had questions. How do you suddenly learn to be a mother? How do you love someone so deeply, so quickly? And the hardest of all, how do you make sure this child never feels unworthy again? The answers weren't clear yet. But in that quiet hospital room, as machines monitored the soft rhythm of a little girl who had dared to trust again, Charlotte made a silent vow. She wouldn't just care for Abby, she would choose her every day, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even if she ran again. And this time, she wouldn't leave anything unsaid. Outside the glass wall of the pediatric ICU, a social worker stood watching quietly. She had heard of Charlotte Harper, the businesswoman, the fashion mogul. But this was someone else. Someone who wept, who whispered, who stroked a child's hair like the entire world depended on it. And she thought, maybe this little girl didn't just get a second chance. Maybe this woman did too. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the hospital room windows, casting a golden glow that softened the cold, sterile white of the walls. It had been 3 days since Abby opened her eyes, and while her recovery was still slow, it was steady. The fever had broken, her breathing grew more stable, and the color was beginning to return to her cheeks. Charlotte had remained by her side nearly every moment. She had learned the nurses' schedules, the names of the antibiotics, and how to read the machines. But more importantly, she had learned Abby's silences, the moments she just stared out the window, the small gestures of gratitude, the way she'd gently hold Charlotte's hand when she thought she was asleep. That morning, as the city stretched into a new day, Charlotte sat by Abby's bed, a warm cup of tea in her hands. "Abby," she said quietly, "you're getting stronger." The girl smiled faintly, still fragile. "You think so?" "I'm sure of it, and you've changed too." Abby looked at her curiously. "Before, you used to hide from everything. Now you look me in the eyes. That's strength too, you know?" Abby nodded without speaking, but there was something different in her now, a new kind of light. A fragile thread of trust wrapped itself around every small gesture, as if love, silent and unannounced, was beginning to fill the spaces inside her that no one had dared to reach. Charlotte reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside were 2 simple bracelets made of leather and golden thread, delicate but strong. "I made these last night in the room next door," she said. "One for me and one for you." Abby took hers gently, studying it like a rare treasure. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Charlotte fastened the other one on her own wrist. "It means we're connected, no matter where, no matter when." Abby smiled, but then her eyes dropped. "And when I leave here, what happens then?" Charlotte took a slow breath. She had been preparing for that question since the moment. She found Abby unconscious at the station. "Do you remember what you asked me the night we met?" she said. "If you could eat what I didn't finish." Abby giggled softly, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, I remember. Well, now I have a question for you." Charlotte stood and sat on the edge of the bed, looking straight into Abby's eyes. "Would you like to live with me? Forever?" The silence that followed seemed to hold the breath of the entire world. Abby blinked, as if she hadn't quite understood. "You mean like your daughter?" Charlotte nodded, eyes glistening. "Exactly, my daughter. With a last name, a school, your own room, your own place, your own love. All yours." Tears spilled down Abby's cheeks before she could even answer. She brought her hands to her mouth, trembling. No one's ever said that to me before." Charlotte took her hands gently in hers. "I'm not saying this lightly. I've thought about it. I've spoken to lawyers, to social workers. I want to do this the right way. I want you to know you're not alone anymore, that someone is choosing you, truly choosing you." Abby wept quietly. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, something that pierced through years of loneliness, cold nights, indifferent stares. It was the overwhelming emotion of hearing, for the very first time, that she was wanted. "I'd love to have a mom again," she whispered. "If you really want me." Charlotte smiled, wiping away the tears running down her own cheeks. More than anything, they embraced right there in that hospital room, surrounded by the scent of flowers someone had left on the nightstand, and the quiet rhythm of hospital monitors. It wasn't the most beautiful place in the world, but in that moment, it was the most real. In the days that followed, the process began. Charlotte contacted her trusted lawyers, reached out to Child Protective Services, and began the official adoption paperwork. The assigned social worker, a woman named Linda, visited the hospital to interview both Charlotte and Abby. She observed the bond between them with practiced eyes, but also with emotion. "Do you understand that adoption is forever, Abby?" she asked gently. "That this means Charlotte will be your legal mother, and you'll have the same rights as any daughter." Abby nodded. "But she's already my mom." "Right here." She pointed to her chest. Linda smiled, visibly moved. "I think that's the most beautiful answer I've ever heard." Charlotte signed the documents with steady hands, even as her heart raced. The word mother still felt surreal when attached to her, but it also felt right. More right than anything had in a long time. Meanwhile, Abby continued to improve. She walked around the room again, wrote in a notebook Charlotte had given her, and began drawing clothes. "For us to wear when we travel someday," she said. Charlotte encouraged her. "You have real talent. If you want to, one day you can work with me." "I want to design clothes for kids who live on the streets," Abby said firmly. "Warm clothes, pretty ones, so they never have to beg for them." Charlotte swallowed hard. "Then we'll do it together." One evening, several days later, Charlotte took Abby up to the hospital rooftop. It was safe, surrounded by tall fences, with a view over the damp rooftops of the city. The air was crisp but not too cold. "See all this?" Charlotte asked, pointing down at the lights below. "Yeah, that world is yours now too. You get to choose, to create, to decide, and no one will ever make you feel invisible again." Abby looked at her, face lit by the city glow. "But what if I mess up? What if you regret it?" Charlotte knelt in front of her, even on the damp ground. "Then I'll hold your hand, and we'll try again, always, because being a mom doesn't mean getting everything right. It means staying, even when it's hard." The girl threw herself into Charlotte's arms, and in that embrace, the world, for a moment, felt possible. But even in that moment of deep connection and newfound certainty, the future still held questions. Between court hearings, paperwork and signatures, Charlotte knew there would be challenges. But she also knew that from that moment forward, she wouldn't be walking alone. And neither would Abby. 6 months had passed since the day Charlotte, hands trembling and eyes filled with tears, signed the final adoption papers. Abby Monroe had officially become Abby Harper. It was legal now, but more than that, it was real. That spring morning, the loft in Soho was no longer the same. The sleek lines and minimalist design were still there, but now they shared space with drawings taped to the fridge, small flower pots in every corner, and a growing stack of children's books in the living room. The once pristine sofa now held colorful pillows and a soft blanket that Abby insisted on keeping close, in case someone wants to snuggle. Charlotte, who once obsessed over control and perfection, now found herself smiling when she tripped over a pair of sneakers left at the door. It was in these little things that love had taken root. Abby was now enrolled in a private school in Brooklyn. Bilingual curriculum, extracurricular activities, and for the first time in her life, a uniform. A backpack with her name embroidered on it, and a lunchbox Charlotte packed every morning, always with a handwritten note tucked inside. "You're stronger than you think. Smile today, the world needs your light. With love, Mom." At first, Abby was embarrassed to read the notes in front of her classmates, but soon she began saving them in the secret pocket of her backpack. One day, she quietly confessed, "When I feel invisible, I read them. And I remember I belong to someone." Charlotte had to hold back tears. Their routine now had the shape of a home. Mornings started with breakfast and laughter, picking out outfits together. Charlotte had dropped her 7 a.m. meetings and now prioritized driving Abby to school. In the afternoons, between creative meetings with her fashion team, she carved out time to go over sketches with her daughter. Abby was developing a sharp sense of style, often impressing even the seasoned designers at Harper Atelier. "You see details no one else does," Charlotte would tell her. "That's because you've lived what no one else has." At night, dinner became their sacred moment. No phones, no rush, just the two of them sharing their days. Abby would talk about her favorite teacher, her new desk partner in science class, or the book she was reading. And Charlotte learned to truly listen. Harper Atelier continued to thrive. But Charlotte made a bold and unexpected announcement. A partial step back from the fashion empire. "I'm dedicating more time to my daughter," she told the press, "and to the most important project of my life, making sure no child ever feels invisible again." And so, the Abby Harper Foundation was born, a non-profit dedicated to helping children experiencing homelessness. Its mission to offer shelter, education, therapy, and most importantly, a sense of belonging. The first center opened in East Harlem, A former warehouse was transformed into a warm, vibrant refuge with cozy dorms, a reading room, a communal kitchen, and a small studio for sewing, art, and storytelling. Abby had helped with every detail. She picked out the paint colors, helped design the volunteer uniforms, and insisted on having a comfort room filled with soft blankets, calming music, and bedtime stories. Because sometimes, she said, you just need a lap to rest in, even if it's borrowed. The first night at the center was unforgettable. Charlotte and Abby welcomed each child personally. The faces were tired, wary, afraid. But seeing Abby, one of their own, now smiling, now safe, now home, something shifted. A few dared to trust. Charlotte watched her daughter with quiet awe. Here was a girl who had walked through fire and still chose to reach back for others. She has the soul of someone who understands the price of hope, one volunteer whispered. Charlotte smiled. She is hope. But not everything was easy. One afternoon, Abby came home from school in silence. She avoided Charlotte's gaze, locked herself in her room, and later left a sheet of paper on the kitchen table. It was a drawing, a small girl surrounded by towering shadows. Charlotte entered her room slowly. Do you want to tell me what happened? Abby bit her lip, her voice barely audible. Some girls laughed at me, said I'm the poor adopted kid, that I only go to that school because you're rich. Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed, calm and steady. And what did you say? Nothing. I just wanted to disappear. She looked away. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'll never truly fit in. Charlotte gently cupped her daughter's face. They're not right. They don't know who you are. You're more than your past. You're brave. And you know what else? What? Before you, I had money. But now, I have purpose. And that's worth more than anything, Abby cried softly. But that night, before falling asleep, she wrote something new in the notebook beside her bed. My mom chose me, and I chose to stay. Months later, the Abby Harper Foundation was already expanding to other cities. Partnerships, donations, volunteers. The project was gaining momentum. But at home, Charlotte protected their simplicity. Park walks, pizza and movie nights, afternoons sketching on the balcony. Being a mom is my most important runway, she often said. Abby, now wearing outfits she had designed herself, began giving small interviews, always honest but never pitiful. I don't want people to feel sorry, she said. I want them to believe change is possible. And Charlotte, who once took pride in landing business magazine covers, now got emotional seeing her daughter on the front of a children's publication, the headline reading, From Invisible to Inspiration. The girl who proved love changes everything. But even with all the transformation, Charlotte knew one decision still waited to be made, and she was preparing for it. A decision not about business, not about charity, but about faith in the future, and about multiplying the love that began with one quiet question whispered in a restaurant corner. Can I eat what you don't finish? It was a sunny afternoon when Abby came home with red eyes and tense shoulders. Charlotte noticed it the very moment her daughter walked through the door. Something was wrong. How was school? She asked gently, but there was no reply. Abby dropped her backpack on the living room floor and headed straight to her room. Charlotte gave it a few minutes before knocking softly. Can I come in? A muffled yes came from inside. Abby was sitting on the bed, hugging her pillow. She wasn't crying, but there was a visible weight in her posture, something pressing from the inside. Today, during recess, she began, 2 girls from my class were talking about me. They said they know where I came from, that I'm just some sad story you used to get on TV. Charlotte felt her chest tighten. And what did you say? Nothing. I just stood there. But afterward, I felt so ashamed, like maybe that's all I am. Just a sad story people like to tell. Charlotte sat beside her calmly and close. Abby, listen to me carefully. She gently took the girl's hand. Your past doesn't define you. What defines you is who you choose to be. And you're strong, kind, smart. And you're my daughter. No one can take that away. Abby looked up, her eyes filled with tears. But sometimes it still hurts to remember. Charlotte nodded. It does hurt. And sometimes it always will. But love doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. and you've already transformed mine. Before you, she continued, her voice thick with emotion, I had a career, a name, but I didn't have a reason. You saved me, Abby. You gave me purpose. Abby took a deep breath and leaned into Charlotte's lap. Do you think I'll ever forget? Maybe not forget, Charlotte said softly, but you'll grow so much, shine so brightly, that it will become just a small part of your story. The part where everything began. They sat there in silence for a long time, and in that quiet moment the pain of the past was embraced, not erased or ignored, but transformed into something bearable, something that with time could become a scar, a beautiful scar, one that no longer hurt. Spring in New York brought more than just blooming flowers to the parks. It also brought an unexpected invitation. Abby's school was organizing an integration week, focused on empathy and personal stories. Parents were invited to speak, briefly about life experiences, and although hesitant at first, Charlotte agreed. Are you sure? Abby asked nervously, adjusting her uniform on the morning of the event. Charlotte smiled. You taught me that telling the truth can change people. I think it's time I do the same. The school auditorium was packed. Teachers, students, and families filled the neatly arranged rows. Abby, seated among the crowd, squeezed her hands tightly together. When Charlotte walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. She brought no slides, no statistics, just a folded piece of paper, which she never even opened. Good afternoon, she began, her voice steady. My name is Charlotte Harper, and until not long ago I thought I had everything. A solid career, a well-known company, awards, but what I didn't have was meaning. She paused and looked at Abby. Everything changed the day a girl, with hungry eyes and a tired soul, came up to my table in a restaurant and asked, "Can I eat what you don't finish?" The silence deepened. That girl taught me more about courage, dignity, and love than any book or professional success ever could. She showed me that the world doesn't need more luxury. It needs more humanity. Charlotte took a few slow steps across the stage. She's my daughter now. And I didn't adopt her out of pity. I adopted her because her presence transformed me. Because she isn't a sad story. She is a living miracle of resilience, an inspiration. In the crowd, Abby couldn't hold back her tears. Charlotte finished. If there's one thing I hope you take from this today, it's this. Never underestimate the power of a gesture. A kind look, an outstretched hand. Sometimes all someone needs to bloom is to be seen. The audience rose to their feet in applause. More than clapping, it was acknowledgement, a moment of quiet transformation. After the presentation, several children approached Abby. Some classmates, who once teased her, now offered apologies. Others hugged her. One boy said, "You're way braver than any of us." That day, Abby walked home with straighter shoulders, her head held high, her heart lighter. And before falling asleep that night, she whispered, "Today, I felt like I belong." Charlotte wrapped her in her arms. Because you do, and you always will. Whoa, the Grand Oak restaurant looked exactly as it had on that distant night. Gleaming chandeliers, flawless waiters, and elegantly plated dishes served with quiet precision. But tonight, something felt different. Sitting at the very table where everything had begun, Abby, now 14, looked around with new eyes. Beside her, Charlotte smiled with pride. It was a dinner in celebration of the 3-year anniversary of the Abby Harper Foundation. More than 800 children had already been welcomed into their care. 10 new centers were under construction across several states. And Abby herself was now leading youth programs, teaching kids her age about the power of listening and empathy. It feels strange to be back here, she said, fidgeting with her napkin. Like everything's come full circle. Charlotte took her hand. Because it has. And you're the living proof. The evening continued with laughter, shared memories, and quiet glances between the two. But near the end of the meal, something across the room caught Abby's attention. On the far side of the dining hall, a small girl was approaching an empty table with timid steps. Her hair was dirty, her coat several sizes too big, and her eyes, shadowed by hunger, scanned the plates left behind. Abby stood up without hesitation. Charlotte watched her walk toward the girl with a calm but steady pace. It was like watching a reflection of the past, but now glowing with new light. "Hi," Abby said softly. "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded, saying nothing. "Would you like to sit with us?" The child hesitated. Her wide eyes searched Abby's face. Then in a small, almost imperceptible motion, she nodded again. Abby gently took her hand and led her back to the table where Charlotte was waiting. "She's having dinner with us," Abby said naturally. "Just like you did with me." Charlotte's eyes shimmered as she smiled. "Welcome," she said to the girl. "What's your name?" "Grace," she whispered. Abby pulled out the chair beside her. "You know, Grace, sometimes all we need is a chance." Charlotte watched the two of them together and felt something blooming deep inside. It wasn't just pride. It was gratitude, because in that moment right before her eyes, love had come full circle. The circle of kindness closed, not as an ending, but as the beginning of something new. Grace smiled slowly, still unsure, but something in her eyes began to brighten, and Charlotte knew there was another story waiting to be told. Another life, just about to change. The week after the dinner at the Grand Oak, Grace was already sleeping in a room decorated by Abby. Yellow curtains, children's books, and little star-shaped lights glowing softly above the bed. It was the same room where Abby had spent her first safe night years before. Now that space held new meaning. "She's afraid of sleeping in the dark," Abby said one evening. "So I left a flashlight next to her bed, just like you did for me." Charlotte smiled, watching her daughter with quiet tenderness. There was no denying it now. Abby was becoming more and more like her. Not in appearance, but in essence. And maybe that was even more powerful. In the days that followed, Grace slowly began to open up. She still spoke little, but smiled more. She clung to Abby's hand when crossing the street. She ran to Charlotte whenever thunder cracked the sky. She drew tiny figures with crayons on the living room floor and asked, with wide eyes, "Can I stay here?" For many days, Charlotte always gave the same answer. "You can stay here as long as you want, and I hope it's forever." That same week, during a televised interview, Charlotte made an announcement that shocked the nation. "I've decided to donate half my fortune, $500 million, to expand the reach of the Abby Harper Foundation. Our mission is simple, that no child in the United States goes to sleep without a roof, without a name, without someone who sees them." Abby watched from home, holding Grace's hand. "She's really amazing, isn't she?" she whispered. Grace nodded. "Just like you." Abby squeezed her hand a little tighter. The news swept across the country. Donations poured in. Business leaders wanted to partner. But beyond the numbers, the real impact was deeply human. Stories of children finding homes, teens returning to school, young people starting their own community centers, inspired by Abby's journey. At home, however, the essence remained unchanged. Nights were still filled with hot chocolate and whispered stories. Mornings were still a race for pancakes and catching the school van on time. And now there were 3 pairs of shoes by the door, 3 voices saying goodnight, 3 hearts stitching themselves together, gently, quietly. On the final night of spring, Charlotte stood watching the 2 girls sleep, Abby on one side, Grace on the other. Soft, steady breaths rising and falling in the quiet. She whispered into the stillness, a prayer of thanks to the universe. "One girl taught me how to love, the other, how to begin again." Then she closed her eyes, because deep down she knew the next miracle had already begun. "Now tell me, what if it were you? What if a child looked you in the eyes and asked, 'Can I eat what you didn't finish?' Would you look away, or would you change someone's world?" This story isn't just about Charlotte and Abby, it's about choices, about seeing the invisible, about valuing what truly matters. If this story touched your heart, don't leave just yet. Watch until the end. Share it with someone who needs to believe in love again. And remember, here, every story is a reunion with our shared humanity.